Hi, and welcome to today's episode in the Caserta Data Intelligence webinar series. I'm Remy Rosenbaum, VP Marketing at Caserta, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. In this episode, we're going to explore how to build a data catalog to smartly exploit your data assets. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. At Caserta, we help business and IT leaders like you transform their organizations by and through their data. We do strategic consulting, architectural design, and advanced implementation across the full data ecosystem. Our complimentary industry expert webinar series is designed to give you insight into today's hottest technological trends and issues. After the webinar, you're encouraged to speak with me about any questions you have on how to apply what you learned today at your organization. Our initial consultations are always free, and if we find an opportunity to work together, then we can discuss next steps. And if not, I'll gladly point you in the right direction. After the webinar, we're going to send you a recording to the email address you provided. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, I encourage you to enter them in the questions panel on the right, and we'll answer them during the live Q&A session after the webinar. Okay, so today we're going to deep dive into data catalogs. You're going to learn what is a data catalog and why it is essential for data-driven organizations. We're going to show methods and tools to democratize your data, and how automation is crucial for consistent reuse of data. We have two excellent presenters that we got for today's episode. First, we have Richard Thomas, a principal solutions architect with Caserta. He has more than 20 years of experience for data strategy, architecture, development, and implementation. And he has worked on data catalog projects at S&P Global and other bold-faced firms. Richard is going to explore the more technical aspects of data catalogs. Then we're going to hear from Aaron Kalb. Aaron is the co-founder of Alation, where he currently serves as VP Design and Strategic Initiatives. Before Alation, he worked on Siri and iOS at Apple and received his BS and MS from Stanford. Aaron will talk about real-world data catalog success stories and business outcomes. Richard, let's begin with you.
Thanks, Remy, for the introduction. Today we'll actually go through some considerations in building a data catalog, basically looking at your company as an individual entity and how it might use a data catalog versus some of the generalizations that are actually being stated in the industry today. As we look at some of the providers of software out there, they all generally say or are saying the same thing about what they offer. Something, the software, that's providing a single source to provide intelligence for enterprise data, to provide a single access control for collaboration, where everybody in your organization can find the data they want to work with. And these quotes are actually from Caserta, Talent, and Alation. But while you look at a catalog as sort of like a generic entity, for your organization, it can actually be something that's fairly specific. And that's really how your organization would use that catalog. As you look here on the right-hand side and you look at, some of the generalizations about what a catalog is, its purpose, the data type, search criteria, and associated metadata that would need to be organized and associated with the source of your physical data. While that is generic within your company, that's actually pretty specific. How will you as a company use and catalog that data? Are you looking at your SQL data or your data lakes or cloud buckets? Data types, are you looking at data as data sets or as dictionaries that you want to catalog to find out where that physical data is? Search criteria, when you look at the business metadata or technical metadata about how you'll find that data, company by company, that can actually be very different. And those taxonomies, need to be built and thought about. So as your users look and search for data, they look for it and search for that in a way that they're accustomed to already. Be it by looking for that data in a non-automated fashion or looking through the physical data to find out what they're looking for. The data entry method and data source, so once you decide how you want that data catalog to look and feel, where will that data come from to populate it? Most of these catalogs have some sort of method to do a crawling, either be it go out there and get the data or use it as a method to get the data into the catalog. But you also want to think about how will that data be maintained going forward. As your data sources get updated, be it the data itself or the metadata, how will that make it into the catalog so that that becomes, a continually updated source of truth for finding your data? And of course, security, how do you get into the catalog itself? But if physical data is accessible through the catalog, how is that actually managed and maintained? So as you look at each of the specifics of the catalog, while it seems generic overall, it really isn't. It really is specific to how your enterprise uses that data. As you're building your data catalog, you actually want to take into consideration your enterprise strategy about data itself. For example, your data catalog can actually provide visibility into your data lake as data is available in typical raw, structured, and modeled form, and then going further into, a data mart, reports, etc. That catalog can actually provide information on where that data is, where it's available, the security of that, and also the reports and ETL that's actually moving and providing visibility into the data. In data movement jobs, going back to those ETL and ELT jobs, you could actually use the data catalog as your source and destination in, say, a Spark job. So instead of providing physical reference of that within the jobs themselves, you could actually point back to the data catalog structure and include that in those jobs. So as your data source and destinations change and update, then the pointers into those jobs can actually provide updated information as well. Data quality is another consideration that you can think of relative to a data catalog. As the catalog actually points to physical data, things like data profiling can actually be incorporated into the backend structure. So the output of that data could be visible through the catalog. Things such as ranges of values, the availability of nulls in the data, and users, as they look into the catalog, they could see that data to know, what's available, the range of that relative to date, and that data quality to know if it's usable or not. Other things to think about in the catalog is PII data, classifying that data so it's available to the enterprise, the rights of use. If you look at your data and you look at who can use that and how they can use that, there are typical examples of controlling methods of that, such as a contract that might be indexed along with that data. So if someone goes into the catalog and wants to know if they can actually see the physical data and query it, how they might do that, and how they actually might use the data in a sandbox environment through things like derived values and summing up that data for other use. As you think about building a data catalog, some of the challenges to consider are the enterprise buy-in. Getting everyone to agree on what that catalog is and how it might be used is an important factor to getting it implemented. You don't want to get to the implementation stage of putting this in place and have people wonder at different levels and across the enterprise what this is. Starting to demonstrate what that is early on so that people understand what this thing is coming in the future and how they might use it, and actually taking their feedback and incorporating that into your requirements to have a more robust solution will provide that better path into production later on. Thinking about the business metadata that might be available in the environment, how that might be crawled and where it is, requires structure and building. How do users think about their data will actually help you consider how taxonomies might be built to describe that data. Things such as sector or geography being applied to data can help users when they're actually searching through a catalog to find what they're looking for. The physical data access, if you're going to use that catalog to actually get to your physical data, you want to think about how you're going to do that based on size, how large is that data. If my user requests 50 gigabytes of data, how long will it take to get to them in a sandbox or other environment? What's the security on that data? Once it leaves my source system and it goes to someplace else for analytics access and validation, how will I manage that data being in a different place? That physical data access and controlling that is very important to make sure that your data sources don't get out of hand or unmanageable. And then again, further going to that rights of use, who can use my data and how can it be accessed? Within enterprise, you may end up having different owners of data, whether they bought that data or whether they built it themselves. Taking the my data and making it our data is very important as you're building this catalog. And then again, how can it be used, whether it's a contract or otherwise? Validating that the usage of the data doesn't get out of hand and managing that through testing and validation as it's going into that production environment out of a sandbox implementation. One of our projects at Caserta was working with S&P Global. And as we worked with them, we did it in a multi-phased approach. They brought us in to help them understand how a catalog would fit within their organization. And as we spoke to the number of executive users or sponsors that were going to be part of this project, each one of them had a different point of view of what that catalog was. And they didn't know that until we were with them for a few weeks and we started talking with them. And we realized early on that a large part of this project was going to be getting a common understanding of what this catalog was going to be. So we actually took that and built that out with S&P and demonstrated it through a POC idea or concept. We built something in an AWS environment and demonstrated through these different requirements, different understandings, what a catalog might look like and how a user actually might interact with that catalog. And as we took that POC and demonstrated that across divisions, we started to get buy-in into that environment. And as those divisions provided feedback, we built that out into the POC and prioritized those requirements to include in a path to create an MVP. As we did that, and as that buy-in occurred, people started to get really interested in what that catalog might be. And as we built that out into an MVP environment, also in AWS incorporating single sign-on, we started to build out those taxonomies of how people describe their data and provided that into an automated path to associate it with their internal data sets. As S&P sells data associated with the financial markets, many of their data sets are not just providing information into that, but into information into where the source of that data comes in. So much of this data, while it could be shared at an enterprise level, much of it was managed and controlled and only visible to the division level based on the security of that data, creating those production data sets for ultimate output to the public. So we actually built in those different levels of security into the environment based on the requirements. And as we went through division by division and demonstrated how that would work and how their data could actually roll up not just at a division level, but at an enterprise level, that buy-in occurred even more. As we communicated the project status and what would start to happen going into a production environment, Again, that buy-in occurred further, and we were ready to go into the next phase. We took that MVP environment and used that as a basis to build out the last requirements. We decided that we wanted to incorporate a rights of use into that environment so that physical data could actually be controlled based on an individual user and metadata about that user. Some simple things such as the department that they were in, the office they were in, the type of user that they are, be it an employee or a non-employee. We use that as a basis, so through the catalog, if they had physical access to the data, they actually had a button available that they could request that physical data to go down to a sandbox environment, basically an S3 bucket that user could then use as a data source with controlled rights of use, along with an expiration that was controlled back to the data catalog into the S3 bucket. So the user could use that for a finite period, and if they needed that data for a future use, they could either recheck it out or go back to the owner and ask for more availability. All controlled through the data catalog itself and through the back end of the architecture. Once this was implemented, we actually populated the data catalog by crawling out to data as identified sources, and also providing a single path to get the data into the environment as a one-time update. That actually occurred for about 20,000 data sets. And then the attributes that were underlying that were all traceable back to the physical data sources. This was all validated across the divisions. User acceptance testing occurred, and the users signed off on that, and that actually went into a production environment. So as we look at this phase 1 to phase 3 life cycle, that occurred from October until July. A pretty big return on what ended up being mostly custom development off of open source software. As we look back to that project and other projects that we've done this, we've actually looked at, a multi-step approach to actually get these things in place. At the first level, plan out what you want to do and get that buy-in across the organization. Prove that you can do it through that POC environment and demonstrate it across those divisions or enterprise. Getting people to agree on what that is early on is very important to your success later in the project. If they're not going to agree at this step, then they're not going to agree later on. It's not going to be easier. It's almost better to stop here, find out what's not working, and fix it. And then go to the point that you're actually architecting that environment, developing it, and validating that architecture, and then doing another demonstration of that environment where it is at that point to the business sponsors. Finally, implementing that environment and populating it with that data, testing it across the users that will end up using it, which ends up being a sampling of users based on various user types. And then finally putting that into a production environment. Going down this path, is a solution. As you look at your enterprise, this could actually be a sample of what could occur to get a project like this in place. Remy, thank you very much, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Richard, for that presentation. If you'd like to hear about more success stories of data catalogs that we did with other firms, please reach out to me, and I can share those with you. Now we're going to continue to Aaron from Alation. Aaron, take it away.
Okay, everyone. So thanks for that great introduction. And now that we know kind of how catalogs work and what goes in them, I have the privilege of being able to talk about how catalogs actually impact companies. And I'm from Alation, one of our core values is that we measure success through customer impact. So I'm super excited to talk about the many ways our customers are using catalogs. And we'll do a bit of breadth first, look at the kinds of geographies and sectors and industries where catalogs are being used very briefly, and then dive into 5 quick case studies that show some of the different ways catalogs are having an impact. So here is a sampling of our customers. I think there's, let's see, I think 29 on this screen. We have many more. We can't show all the logos. And as we discussed earlier in the webinar, there are other catalog vendors. So catalogs really are all over the place now. We see catalogs being used across different geographies. Here I'm highlighting all of our customers on this slide that are in Europe. There's others that aren't listed here, and the rest of the logos you see are from North America. But you see in Europe, we've got in Munich, Germany, BMW is a pretty recognizable brand there, as well as Munich Reinsurance, and we'll do a deep dive in Munich Re at the end. We see the biggest retailer in the UK, Tesco. Some of you may do home delivery from HelloFresh, and also in Berlin with them is Scout24. Allegro I'll talk about in a second, and we see also some of the biggest banks in Denmark, as well as in Austria. So, big on both sides of the Atlantic, as well as catalogs being used across different sectors, from state governments, like in the great state of Florida, to the city of San Diego. And we'll do a case study of how San Diego is getting impact out of a catalog in a bit. But perhaps the greatest diversity we see is across verticals. We see catalogs being used in traditional transportation, like trains with BNSF Railway, to sort of a modern twist on transportation, Lime, which does scooter and bike rentals. We see from traditional retail, like Tesco, I mentioned earlier, and Albertsons, and we'll do a case study on Albertsons in a bit, to sort of disruptive modern peer-to-peer marketplaces like eBay. We'll do a case study, and the sort of equivalents in Latin America, and Allegro I mentioned earlier is based out of Poland. And speaking of marketplaces, we see catalogs making a huge impact in financial services. There's more that I can't list here, but this is a sector that's really taken to cataloging, both for governance purposes as well as for driving revenues. So in addition to the European ones I mentioned earlier, we have Commonwealth Bank in Australia. I just came back from visiting them, actually, and an iconic American brand in finance as well. And from there to insurance with Munich Re again, and a couple others shown here, to technology, to energy, just some of the biggest utilities on the East and West Coast here in the States, to ultimately even into healthcare, with everything from hospital services to pharmacies, to examples here, like more about Express Scripts in a minute, to ResMed, which manufactures medical devices to treat sleep apnea. We have others working on diabetes and whatnot as well. So really catalogs, if you're watching this and you're wondering, does my business need a catalog? We see mounting data that no matter where you're located, what sector you're in, and what industry you're in, there's precedent for a catalog kind of driving your business forward and adding value. And I'll spend the rest of the talk going into a little bit more depth in a few of these to just show you kind of what sort of impacts catalogs can have. So we'll start out by quickly connecting the dots to the earlier presentation about what a data catalog can do and the business impacts they can have. First, I'm introducing this term machine learning data catalog. This is the term that Forrester settled on in their first Forrester Wave inclusion data catalog. And I just got back from the Gartner conference in Sydney, where Etta Shamsidi, Gartner analyst, did a session in which he's now also using machine learning data catalog. So this is going back to Rich's point about how catalogs are populated and how much of that is a manual process versus an automated process. This is finding that with the volumes of data enterprises have today, you need to use some automation and machine learning to really achieve the goal. So I'll show you a bit of how that looks. In Alation's catalog here, very briefly in the theory, and then going into how it affects a couple of customers, Express Scripts and eBay, who we previewed before. So the core idea here, excuse me, sorry, missed a build there, is we've got this idea of behavior I/O, which is all about taking implicit signals from humans, kind of the input of prior human behavior, and using it to drive and improve future human behavior and automation in the catalog. So we'll start with one example of that, where Allie, the Alation robot, sort of shown here in the middle in this black box, will go in and parse all the physical data names and documentation and conversation around the data, and use that to generate titles for otherwise inscrutable data assets. And what I liken this process to is a little bit to how a baby learns a language, right? If any of us on this call who are adults are trying to learn a foreign language, it's a very laborious process where you have to go to a night class and study vocab sheets and conjugation charts, and you'll always have an accent and limited vocabulary. But, you know, this baby on the screen, she'll learn any language just by eavesdropping on the adults in her life talking to each other. That's kind of how a machine learning data catalog with Alation's lexicon feature can work. So here on the right, we have a screenshot of a demo instance where there's abbreviations like bus and auth and org that appear, and Allie the robot comes in and guesses that you know, bus might stand for business and org might stand for organization. Though in a hospital context, maybe it stands for organ. It's an organ transplant, something like that. Here is authorizing or author. The green heads are the places where the human has confirmed. So machines get, humans confirm. This yellow head means it has not yet been confirmed. And so I, as a human, can hover over here and either confirm that or reject it. And there's some supervised machine learning that improves it. So what does it look like at customer sites? You know, there's the term BIN that occurs in a lot of data elements. Sometimes it can just mean bin. Sometimes it might be short for binary. At eBay, I mentioned earlier, they have an auction site. You can circumvent the auction by just paying a bunch and buying it now. Bin options for buy it now there. And Allie the robot will learn that the same way that a baby will learn the language in its home. Allie will learn the language and the lingo of an organization. So now some quick fun we can have with the audience. Here are some terms that might mean something in your daily life. HD, when I hear that term, I think high definition. OOP, I'm a geek, I think object-oriented programming. But what do you guys think that might mean at Express Scripts, which is a specialty pharmacy, one of our customers? So if it's mystifying to you, it also might be mystifying to analysts who are just starting there. But thankfully, with the lexicon, Allie was able to figure out that HD stands in that context often for home delivery, and OOP stands for out of pocket. And these are just a few examples, but spreading this over thousands of data fields and data tables, this can really make things that are hard to understand much clearer. The second thing we'll look at is not just what the language is, but also kind of people's patterns of behavior. So we'll parse the query logs and the usage logs and use that to figure out who's using what, when, and how, and recommend how you should use things in the future. And what this is most like is an app like Google Maps that has traffic information. So here's Los Angeles from above and showing how fast traffic is moving. And as you may know, this is calculated not by everybody, you know, saying how fast they're moving, but just by Google observing how fast all the Android phones that are sitting in people's pockets and in their cup holders are moving on different highways, and aggregating that up to give traffic information. And this gets integrated into Google's turn-by-turn directions. So they'll advise you to, you know, route around the worst traffic. Well, you can do the same thing for data by looking at the patterns of who's using what to guide future behavior. Owning a piece of data, usually instead of saying avoid the traffic, often you want to learn from your peers and do what they're doing. So how that looks on a Alation page is things like popularity, which is a metric based on the recency and frequency of past use. We call that frequency. And that helps you know what data is useful and what data is not. We'll cover that more in a minute with an eBay example. We'll look at who the top users are. These are great people to assign to be stewards, per Richard's point earlier, great people to ask if you have questions. And they can also indicate what kind of data you're looking at. If these people are all in one department, for example, that can give you a sense of whether the data is relevant to you. It's a bit like the recommendations that Amazon and Netflix will do based on collaborative filtering of similar users. And finally, at the top here, we have things like joins and filters. These are recommendations for future use. Say, take this table and join it with the other table on this particular condition. Here it's shown in SQL, but you could use this to build the Tableau dashboard or to do some data science work. And likewise for filters. And I mentioned geographic taxonomies at eBay. There were so many different definitions of Europe. And now with Brexit, those may or may not be changing. Knowing the typical groupings your peers are using can really help you find the right one for your analysis. So tying that in from the abstract to a particular use case, this is a screenshot we took from eBay's instance a while ago. We've blurred out everything that might be sensitive here, but here's the basic observation. If I'm an analyst trying to do a project, I can type in a little string here, and I'm looking for a particular table that has a certain kind of data that I want. I type in the string, and each one of these matches, the little yellow part, is the highlight of my search term across all these tables in just a single schema. They have over 1 million tables in their Teradata warehouse, one of the biggest, and this is maybe the biggest in the world. But all of our customers face challenges because as a human, you just can't deal with millions of things at once. So I search for this and I see that term with different suffixes and prefixes and different combinations. I would have no idea which one to choose, except that Alation shows the popularity here and ranks by it. And here in this column, we see data stewards who have left endorsements saying which is the data they most recommend using. And what's interesting to observe here is the most endorsed data is also the most popular. So not everyone in the company knows what to use, but the plurality of people are sort of a leading indicator of what's best. So this is just one example in real life of where, previously I might have to go and click through every single one of these and take a blind guess as to which to use. Having a good machine learning data catalog guides me toward the right one using manual signals and automated signals right away. So now that we've seen what these catalogs can do and some of the benefits they can have, the way we talk about Alation is it helps you find, understand, and trust and know how to use and reuse the data. So you can see kind of where these features of knowing what something's called, knowing who's using it, knowing what's the most used, et cetera, and then getting recommendations for filters and joins can really help you use it in the near term. How does that affect the business ultimately? Well, at eBay, these features, and there's some internal studies at eBay that talked about this, as well as some published research that the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern conducted there with eBay's help. They observed that they were able to reduce analyst onboarding time by over a year. This is quite a shocking statistic. eBay would hire very experienced people with advanced degrees in statistics and computer science, and yet they had such volume and variety of data. It would take a 1.5 years often for one of those people to be able to create a query that has a good chance of being right without a lot of hand-holding from their peers. And when you think about the fact that these people often might be paid more than $200K fully loaded, having a year of their time being spent before they're fully ramped is an enormous cost. Having that year shaved off by having guidance about which things are the right assets to use and how to filter them and join them and what's applicable, that's a huge win for the company up front, especially when you consider that a lot of their analysts are in Silicon Valley where there's high turnover. Somebody might even spend all this time trying to train them and they might wind up leaving. So that's a one-time savings for each individual human analyst, but also on a per project basis. One of the things that they look at is how long it takes to create a query. Obviously, there are many more things that impact the efficiency of the organization. There's whether the queries are correct, just how long it takes to build a dashboard, et cetera. But they did one very long, very rigorous study with this research team from Kellogg and found that query creation was 22% faster on an ongoing basis. So again, if you consider the cost of the humans here, this alone is a big business impact. But the impacts were bigger than just the productivity for individuals, both upfront and per project. There's also cultural changes that happened. eBay had done, had this observation that we see here across all of our customers. There's horror stories of being in an important meeting where somebody presents a chart and the data is going up and to the right. And someone says, hey, I heard about that exact same number going in the other direction in the meeting I was in, a minute ago or yesterday. And this erodes trust in data. And they found that by having traceability and reproducibility of reports is more trust in data and for more data-driven decisions and less things being rolled back. And the other cultural shift they've been able to drive with Alation is having knowledge workers who don't have data in their titles working with data. So having data not just be something that data analysts and data scientists are doing and constantly being asked to pull this number, pull that number by the business, but instead business users, in particular product managers, pulling their own numbers, not just waiting for the end of the quarter to find out how their product or experiments are doing. So this created a more data democratized environment. So these are just some of the impacts of one customer. Now we'll go to a different case study and talk a little more directly about dollars and cents, both for the company and for the buyer. This is a case study out of Safeway Albertsons. And I know Caserta, some of your folks probably are on the East Coast, but Albertsons, Safeway are big here around me in the Bay Area. And Safeway is the brand name you see. Albertsons acquired Safeway a little while ago. And Albertsons, like many retailers, tries to really engage customers with loyalty programs using coupons to get them coming back. Paper coupons you clip out and bring to the store, and they would actually send coupon books to people's homes when they had their addresses. And this was pretty effective, but obviously there's some wasted paper, cost of shipping it, and a little hard to actually measure the efficacy of these programs. Hard to know which coupons come from which person and things like that. Meanwhile, Safeway out here in Pleasanton, this is an old iPhone. They were pioneers of the sort of just for you model, where you have a Safeway Club card, and they were sort of doing a lot of what Amazon was doing disruptively in the web. They were bringing into brick and mortar stores where people would pay and they would swipe their Safeway Club card to get a discount. And as a result, Safeway would have a longitudinal view of everything they're buying, and as a result could send directly to their phone or into their email inbox personalized coupons that would be most likely to have people come back to the store and re-engage. But after the acquisition, Albertsons, the acquirer, wasn't familiar with this approach and was trying to simplify things, so they wanted to use the same paper couponing approach for the subsidiary. And the people who managed the Safeway loyalty program were given a very, very short time frame to kind of prove huge value, or the program was going to be sort of shuttered. And we were happy to hear that Safeway was able to use their catalog to quickly find all the data they needed to show efficacy in the way Albertsons wanted to see. We were able to work around the clock by collaborating over the analysis with a team in the Philippines and in the US, and understand and trace data more easily, to basically show that they could save a bunch of money by using digital instead of paper and get better loyalty in the short and long term. And they found that for every dollar they spent on their catalog with Alation, they got a 30 times ROI, $30 back in value from this one episode alone. So that was something that was really exciting, and you can hear the champion of that project speak about it in more detail if you're interested from our website. So these are two kinds of financial impacts at eBay and at Albertsons. But what makes me kind of the most touched as a co-founder is when our customers not only drive their own organization forward, but have a broader impact in the world. And I think you can see win-win cases where there's a huge monetary value as well as a really positive impact across three of our customers. We'll talk about a public sector example with City of San Diego doing kind of an open data initiative powered by a catalog. A case of actually helping people who are suffering from rare diseases at Pfizer, and finally going back to Munich Reinsurance and how they expedited disaster recovery using a catalog as well as some other technologies. And each one of these are examples of a mixed approach where there'll be visualization and data science and other tools, but a catalog, in this case, Alation's catalog, providing that layer for that step zero of finding data, understanding it, and trusting it, and enabling some really positive impacts that we're really happy about. So at the City of San Diego, they had this project called Streets SD, which enabled any citizen to see road work that's being done and when and how long it's taking, and their money, tax dollars at work, and things like that. And it was a really big impact, people feeling connected to their community and taking something which could seem annoying or confusing and really giving them the ability to appreciate the scale of it and whatnot. So this is what the ultimate site looks like. And here's a blog post that their chief data officer at City of San Diego wrote, featuring an Alation screenshot shown here. You can read the post at your leisure, but here is just an excerpt that I wanted to share. Again, this is in Maxim's own words. When trying to build Street SD, before they could do all the visualization, all that nice end stuff, they first had to find, understand, and trust the data. And they didn't have, eBay millions of tables, but they had 319 tables with various calculations in them that were very obscure until they got Alation in. And Alation helped them document the data, help users be better informed, figure out what the calculations were, where everything came from, which of those 319 were appropriate. And that's what enabled them to build this cool end user tool, as well as many more. So it's one example in the public sector. Next, we have the Wall Street Journal here with an article about how Pfizer was able to solve this issue of data fragmentation with the catalog, shown here in a screenshot from the Wall Street Journal article. The article goes on to describe what folks at Pfizer call their virtual analytics workbench, VAW, which has 3 layers to it. Alation is the cataloging layer for finding, understanding, and trusting the data that can then be queried directly, or it can be visualized in a tool like Tableau, or it can have data science algorithms performed on it in a tool like Dataiku. And they're leveraging this handy feature where they treat the Alation catalog effectively as we call it data OS, the operating system for their data. Here I show, on Mac, how I can find a file on my desktop, Control-click it and say open with, and then pick either a homegrown tool like Preview or a third-party tool for an image like Illustrator or Photoshop. Same thing on Windows, right-click and open with an application of your choice. We have the same thing in Alation, and Pfizer's using that, where you can go and find a particular data asset that could be helpful to diagnose or treat a disease or develop a new therapy or medicine. And they're a big pharma company. And then you can say open with Dataiku and begin to do clustering and advanced analytics to explore your hypothesis of what could help. So that's the case where we're really excited to be making a difference, especially because this is about rare diseases. And normally rare diseases are areas where most pharma companies won't even invest because it's assumed there's not enough ROI, because it's going to cost a ton to develop a treatment, and then you have a limited audience of folks who can buy it. And the article describes how senior folks at Pfizer were saying that data could be a key to lowering that upfront cost and make the ROI equation work, which if you're a person with one of these conditions or one of their family members, gives new hope that actually there will be investment in your area and maybe relief. So we're really excited to see that work come to fruition at Pfizer. The final example that I'll cover today, and then we'll open the floor to some of your questions after a brief summary, is we'll do a slightly deeper dive into Munich reinsurance as covered in Forbes. This is an article, again, that really was touching for us here. Starts off with a great example of customer impact, with Hurricane Florence being the latest of many cases where Munich Re stepped into the aftermath to help devastated homeowners and business owners get back on their feet. Again, direct quote from the article here. Then it goes on, and there's a lot of great richness in the article, but I'll summarize the key part about the Hurricane Florence example is they've invested in fancy remote sensor technology that produce high-resolution images that go into these cutting-edge image classification, AI and ML algorithms that let them do massive payouts that normally would require a ton of manual vetting, lets them do it very quickly after a disaster. And again, direct quote from the article, this reduces the recovery process for these property owners, which would have been months previously, and it shrinks to days thanks to these new high-tech techniques. So again, technology in the service of a very human story of people who, are really hurting, being able to recover and be resilient much more quickly than they otherwise be able to. So how are they able to achieve projects like this? Turns out catalogs are a big part of the first step toward achieving effects like that and similar results they've had for ensuring flight delays and things that are maybe a little bit less tragic than hurricanes. So the quote here is that to manage the data lake, Munich Re has created a data ecosystem which is supported by Alation, which enables them to navigate their data lake so that analysts and data scientists can work collaboratively with their data. It's a central place for search and understanding of the data that lets them develop these great pipelines for different kinds of insurance to help people in the end, like we saw in the previous slides. So now, this is now a quote, and of course, this is quoting Wolfgang, the chief data officer at this time of Munich Re. Within the article, is talking about how Alation helps break down the organizational silos and think differently, a quote that obviously really was fun for me to hear coming out of Apple, and how the data sources provide value across the organization, and they can now understand who's using in addition to their own units. So often there's data that lives in different silos before. By putting it together, they're able to achieve the pipelines like the one in blue we saw a couple of slides ago. So we're very excited that catalogs are a part of that. Now we're leaving the Forbes article, but sticking with Munich Reinsurance, talking a little bit about what Wolfgang is describing a bit more concretely. They've got a massive Hortonworks data lake, and about 2,000 knowledge workers access it through this data lake portal, which is actually, in their case, the Alation catalog. And it's cool, they only had a handful of folks who were able to access the lake before this, but the portals made it extremely widely applicable and usable. Obviously, it's being used by folks with data in their titles: data analysts, data scientists, data engineers. These are folks who report directly to the, no, not report directly, but roll up to the chief data officer there at Munich Re. But also, the portal is being used on the population side by data hunters. This is a cool title that we first heard from Munich Re, and they're, I think, doing some work to popularize. But they have this incredible program they initiated where they'll have people in business units finding external data sets which could be productively joined with data they already have, and they'll go out and onboard that data into their lake. And the thing that makes me the most excited actually is actuaries in the business units. These are folks who are technical, but who don't see themselves as data people. They're people who are modelers and statistics people who are really creating new insurance products and assessing risk. And they're folks who normally would just get data sent to them. Now they're able to self-serve from the data lake through the Alation catalog portal. So, so that's Munich Re. So now again, we see catalogs helping in the public sector, in healthcare, and in reinsurance, and adding that on top of what we saw with Express Scripts and eBay and Albertsons. We can see in summary that catalogs are driving faster analysis, improved accuracy and trust in the data, and broader data access, a word we hear a lot, is democratization as being a goal unto itself and one that helps with business results. And that broader access ranges from product managers at eBay to actuaries at Munich Re to lay people, the man in the streets, the old quote here, this could be, people at home from their computers with the Streets SD app or similar things happening in different organizations. And all of this, first order impact is causing these really great second order effects under major business impacts, most notably more efficient operations, doing processing payouts, in days instead of months in the Munich Re case, or onboarding analysts in a third of the time it used to take, and shaving off a big percentage of individual analytics at eBay. To the development of new products and services like those we saw at City San Diego and at Pfizer, and there's actually another Munich Re example of insurance for clean energy that they weren't able to offer previously to some of their projects that catalog was. Catalog's really having huge impact across the board in Europe and North America and Latin America and Australia and APAC, in public and private sector, and in pretty much every vertical, and across many different parts of the business within each of those contexts. So thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to learn more about machine learning data catalogs and how to be applicable to your organization, you can visit this link, alation.com/MLDC2019, or feel free to message me. And I think also will be, Remy, I think will be facilitating some live calls for both of us presenters now.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. So if you see on your questions panel, you can populate it with any questions you may have, and we can get started. So we do have a bunch of questions already, so I'm just going to jump right into it. So number one, the first question we can turn over to Richard, because Aaron was just presenting. How does a data catalog fit into an enterprise data strategy?
That's actually a good question. Realistically, it can provide the layer into where all the data exists in your enterprise, be it in a lake structure or in source systems or in between. Realistically, these data catalogs can do more than just data sets. They can actually trace back to where the data is actually transposing through your ETL and where it's being delivered in reporting or files or other systems. So realistically, you can think of it as a center post of getting to that data regardless of where it is if it's actually set up and configured well.
Okay, thank you. So we'll turn one over to Alation. What kind of sources can Alation connect to?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Alation aspires to be the single source of reference for all of your data. And a phrase we use is that we give you sort of a bird's eye view from data lakes to dashboards. So there's two types of connectors we offer. We offer sort of custom connectors through APIs for any source in the long tail. But for most sources, we have automatic connectors where you just point us at the source and we'll automatically crawl and index everything. So in terms of data lakes, that'll be HDFS sources like we saw with Munich to S3 buckets on Amazon in the cloud. We have a bunch of customers doing that as well. Then in the middle, we've got databases, everything from SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata, MySQL, DB2, HANA, you name it. And that's an enormous list there in the middle, to dashboards in the other end with cataloging BI sources like Tableau and MicroStrategy and Cognos and Salesforce Einstein Analytics. And all of those lists are going to continue to grow. But you can talk to one of our sales engineers to learn more about which of the things in your environment will have automatic cataloging out of the box and which might require a little more work.
Thanks, Aaron. We'll go back to Richard on this one. Can you specify or flesh out the determination or considerations specifically regarding data catalogs and a data lake?
That's a good question. I would say for the data lake, the catalog could be used to trace the data that's coming into the lake itself, and whether it's actually going through into, say, like a structured or modeled pipeline. So if you think about the catalog being on top of it, it could indicate in that catalog where that data lived. Whether it just lived in the raw area coming in, or whether it made it all the way through into a modeled environment, and actually what tools, ETL, ELT, whatever was created to make that happen, along with that associated traceability.
Thanks, Richard. Back to Aaron. Does the machine learning capability of Alation work against Microsoft Azure environments?
Yes, it depends which part of your Microsoft stack you're talking about. Certainly over SQL Server, we parse those query logs and do all the behavior IO stuff you saw. And we have folks hosting a lot of data in Azure. So the specifics are going to depend organization to organization, and our SE could talk to you about that. But certainly, Microsoft is one of the major vendors that our customers are using.
Great, thanks. And back to Richard. What is the connection between the data catalog and a business glossary? And which one do you create first?
Good question. I would say it's based on what your catalog is indexing. If it's indexing data sets or databases, realistically, that would come first, and then your attributes thereafter. The attributes would be traceable back to the data sets, back to the source systems, back to the technical metadata, and then from there, the definitions of what those are. So I would start with a collection of the attributes first before you started associating the definitions. That doesn't mean you couldn't create the definitions already and then catch up with them on the back end once they're in the data catalog.
And
Thanks.
Remy, if I may, I might just add to that.
Yeah, of course.
One thing we see from our customers is that sometimes instead of being sort of a waterfall, stage 1 is business glossary, stage 2 is sort of data catalog of the physical elements, or vice versa. Often it'll be sort of this iterative cycle where, for the key business terms and KPIs, business glossary terms will be created, and then you can go into your catalog and look up, okay, for this term profit, what are all the ways we see that instantiated historically with some of that behavior IO that I mentioned, see that used across Tableau and MicroStrategy and different SQL databases, and kind of use that descriptive information to then refine the prescriptive, okay, here's the way we want to define profit for this business unit, for that business unit. And over time, both going over term to term and refining each term until it's really precise. So it's kind of not an either or, but both together is a pattern we often see.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to pose this one back to Richard. Does a data catalog give visibility into data changing over time, and how?
Does a data catalog give visibility to data changing?
Over time.
Yeah, it could. I mean, realistically, and I'm going to let Aaron pipe in on this one as well, because if you look at the source of the data, you have the ability to look at when the data was last updated, the increasing size and also the increasing usage based on the logs that are there. So based on that, you would get the changes at a metadata level to that data over time to know that if it's being used and updated.
And did you want to add to that?
That's exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, Richard, that's exactly right. I just add a little bit of color. Like in Alation's catalog, for example, whenever there is a metadata change, a column added, a table dropped, a table created, a new view, that you can also kind of see in sort of a timeline or like change log view, especially for data stewards, really enjoy that. And likewise, if it's a change to the data itself, like new records being inserted, you'll be able to see the date when that last happened, and that can be helpful combined with your own knowledge. If it's a lookup table that hasn't been updated in a year, that's fine. But if it's a transaction table that wasn't updated, for a week, something's probably wrong, and you can do some triggers based on that.
All right. And here's our last question, and I could pose this to both of you. Is there a standard list of metadata that should be placed into the catalog?
I would actually go back and look at what your business does and build that metadata or taxonomies based on your specific business usage. I mean, there's some generic things such as, I think you always really want to know who's stewarding your data, but and then how old the data is, what its source is, things of that nature. But when you get into searching on that data, I really think it ends up being a little bit more specific to the business, finance versus healthcare, because those taxonomies or lists of metadata are going to end up being specific to your business.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I would also add, though, that the question presupposes that you have to make some of these choices. Obviously, for data that requires any manual step to populate, if you've got thousands or millions of data elements, you want to be very thoughtful about what you do first. And often, for example, for compliance reasons, you might have to classify PII. Machine learning can kind of help you do that faster, but often the final determinations need to be made by people. And that's a place where you might want to start. But we sort of looked at it as saying, okay, if a catalog can automatically populate top users, popularity, data type, data name, last updated, et cetera, the question is not what you populate, first, because it can all happen overnight. It's what you sort of surface to the end user based on their needs, and we have some work we can do on that. And the last thing I'd say is the real prioritization is not on which type of metadata, but the metadata for which objects. And the recommendation that we really push there is, first things first, run our behavior IO and our query log ingestion so you can get that popularity ranked list of data assets. I didn't show it in the slides, but I showed that popularity curve where there's popular sources and then a long tail that are less popular. We often find that 95% of the data use happens to 5% of the data. So if you've got to do manual curation in your catalog, do it for the things that are super, super popular before wasting your time on writing things down that no one's ever going to read.
Okay, excellent. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone for coming. If you have any questions that were not answered, please feel free to email me to remy@caserta.com and we will get you the answer to your questions. Again, thank you to our wonderful presenters for presenting today, and the recording will be sent out after it's processed. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.